Kim Hyun pressed his face against the small window of the transport shuttle as it descended toward Kepler 442b. Below him stretched a world unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth. Massive crystal towers rose from purple soil, their surfaces catching light from twin suns and throwing rainbows across the landscape. Flying creatures that looked more like living clouds drifted between the structures, and in the distance, forests of what appeared to be metallic trees swayed in the alien breeze. His stomach twisted with nervous excitement. 3 months ago, he had been a simple biology student at Seoul National University. Now he was about to become the first human to study at the Galactic Institute of Xenobiology, representing not just his country, but his entire species in this historic exchange program. The shuttle touched down with a gentle hum on a landing platform made of smooth, glowing stone. As the doors opened, Hyun stepped out into air that tasted faintly of ozone and something sweet he could not identify. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, making each step feel like a small bounce. "Welcome, human Hyun," came a voice that sounded like music played on crystal bells. He turned to see his greeter approaching across the platform. Professor Velthera was tall, nearly 3 meters, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. She had 4 arms that moved with graceful, flowing motions, and her face was kind despite being completely alien. Her large, dark eyes reflected the light like deep pools of water. "Thank you, Professor," Hyun said, bowing slightly in the Korean way. "I am honored to be here." The professor's translator device, a small crystal attached to her chest, flickered as it processed his words and tone. "Your politeness is noted and appreciated. Our students are very curious about your species. You are the first human any of us have met." They walked together through the campus, and Hyun tried not to stare too obviously at the incredible sights around him. Students of dozens of different species moved along the pathways between buildings. Some looked like walking trees with faces in their bark. Others resembled giant insects made of living gemstones that clinked softly as they moved. A group of beings that appeared to be made of glowing gas floated past in transparent containers, their forms shifting and swirling. "Your dormitory is designed to accommodate your specific biological needs," Professor Velthera explained as they entered a building that curved upward like a spiral shell. "Earth-normal atmosphere, gravity adjustment, and temperature control. We have also prepared foods that should be safe for human consumption, based on the data your government provided." Hyun's room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and small kitchen area. The walls showed holographic displays of Earth scenes that changed slowly from forests to oceans to cities. It was meant to be comforting, but it only made him feel more aware of how far from home he was. "Rest today," the professor said. "Tomorrow you begin classes. You are enrolled in advanced interspecies biology with me. The other students are eager to meet you." The next morning, Hyun woke early and spent extra time preparing himself. He wore his best casual clothes and practiced introducing himself in the mirror. He wanted to make a good impression for all of humanity. The lecture hall was enormous, with seats arranged in curved rows that rose up like an amphitheater. As Hyun entered, conversations in dozens of different languages stopped. The sounds were incredible. Some students communicated with musical tones, others with clicking noises, and a few seemed to use flashing lights. Professor Velthera gestured to an empty seat in the 3rd row. "Class, please welcome our exchange student, human Hyun from the planet Earth." As he walked down the steps, Hyun felt hundreds of eyes, sensors, and other perception organs focusing on him. The attention was overwhelming. Some students leaned forward to get a better look, while others seemed to shrink back in their seats. He took his assigned seat between a student who looked like a walking crystal formation and another who resembled a large flower with arms. The crystal being chimed softly at him, which his translation earpiece interpreted as a greeting. The flower student rustled her petals and released a scent that somehow conveyed friendliness. "Good morning," Hyun said softly to both of them, offering a smile. This simple gesture caused a ripple of excited whispers throughout the hall. The crystal student's internal lights flickered rapidly, and the flower student's petals changed from green to a warm yellow color. Professor Velthera began her lecture about symbiotic relationships in interspecies ecosystems, but Hyun could feel the continued attention of his classmates. Every time he moved, even slightly, heads turned his way. When he took notes, Several students craned their necks to see what human writing looked like. During a break in a lecture, a student who looked like a small, friendly dragon approached him. Through the translator, her voice sounded curious but cautious. "Human Hyun, is it true that your species comes from a world with only one sun?" "Yes," he replied, happy to answer questions. "Just one sun and one moon." This information spread quickly through the room in a wave of chirps, chimes, and glowing patterns. Many of these students came from worlds with multiple stars, and the idea of a single sun system fascinated them. As the day continued, Hyun began to relax. His classmates were curious rather than hostile, and Professor Velthra made sure to include him in discussions. He was starting to think this exchange program might actually work. He had no idea that tomorrow morning would change everything. Kim Hyun woke up feeling confused and groggy. The light coming through his dormitory window looked wrong, too bright and coming from the wrong angle. He grabbed his communication device and checked the time, then groaned loudly. He had completely forgotten that Kepler 442b had 28-hour days instead of Earth's 24 hours. His internal clock was still adjusting, and now he was running very late for Professor Velthra's morning lecture. He jumped out of bed and rushed to get ready. There was no time for a proper shower or his usual morning routine. He threw on yesterday's clothes and ran to the small kitchen area in his room. His stomach was growling loudly, reminding him that he had skipped dinner the night before while studying alien biology texts. The kitchen was stocked with foods that Earth scientists had determined would be safe for humans to eat. Most of it was bland and unfamiliar, designed to meet his nutritional needs without being too strange. But hidden in the back of the cold storage unit were a few items from home that he brought with him, real Earth food that he missed desperately. Hyun quickly grabbed eggs, bacon, and coffee beans. He had been saving these precious supplies for a special occasion, but being late and homesick seemed special enough. The egg sizzled in the pan as he fried the bacon until it was crispy and fragrant. The smell filled his small room with the comforting aromas of home. He brewed strong black coffee in a thermal mug and added a small amount of gochujang to his scrambled eggs, just the way his mother had taught him. He packed everything into portable containers and ran across the campus toward the lecture hall. Other students moved aside as he rushed past, some making surprised noises at seeing a human moving so quickly. His bouncing steps and the lighter gravity made him feel like he was running in slow motion, which was frustrating when he was already late. The lecture hall doors were closed when he arrived, and he could hear Professor Velthra's musical voice inside, already deep into the day's lesson. Hyun took a deep breath, opened the door as quietly as possible, and slipped inside. The enormous room was packed with students of every species imaginable. Professor Velthra was at the front, using her forearms to gesture at a holographic display, showing symbiotic relationships between different life forms. When she saw Hyun enter, she paused for just a moment and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing her lecture. Hyun found his usual seat and sat down carefully, trying not to disturb anyone. He whispered quiet apologies to the crystal student and flower student on either side of him. The crystal being chimed softly in what he had learned was their version of "don't worry about it." His stomach rumbled again, reminding him of his breakfast cooling in its containers. The lecture was scheduled to run for another hour, and he was really hungry. He decided to eat quietly while listening to the professor's explanation of cross-species cooperation. Hyun opened his first container and used his fork to take a bite of the scrambled eggs mixed with the spicy red gochujang. The familiar taste made him smile, despite his embarrassment at being late. He chewed quietly and reached for his coffee, taking a careful sip of the hot, bitter liquid. That was when he noticed a change in the room's atmosphere. Conversations that had been happening in whispered tones between students suddenly stopped completely. The constant background noise of different species communicating, the soft chimes, gentle rustles, and quiet, clicking sounds, faded away until the lecture hall was eerily silent. Hyun looked up from his breakfast to find that every single being in the room was staring at him. The crystal student beside him had turned from clear white to a dim amber color, which he had learned meant concern or worry. The flower student's petals had darkened and were trembling slightly. Even Professor Velthra had stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her forearms were frozen in their expressive gestures, and her large dark eyes were fixed on Hyun's breakfast with an expression he could not read. He swallowed his bite of eggs and looked around nervously. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. This seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. Suddenly, students began talking all at once in dozens of different languages. The translation devices around the room started working frantically, creating a chaos of overlapping voices and sounds. "What is that substance?" asked one voice. "The thermal signature is extreme," said another. "Is he consuming organic matter?" came a third, sounding shocked. Hyun held up his fork, which had another bite of eggs on it. It's just breakfast. Scrambled eggs and coffee." The translation devices worked to convert his words into the various communication methods used by his classmates. As the meaning became clear to each species, the reactions grew stronger. Some students leaned forward with intense curiosity, while others actually moved their chairs backward, away from him. A student who looked like a living tree with a face in its bark raised one of its branch-like arms. "Human Hyun, what exactly are these eggs you speak of?" Hyun suddenly realized that his simple breakfast might not be as simple to explain as he had thought. He looked down at his food, then back at the dozens of alien faces staring at him with mixtures of fascination and horror. "Well," he began slowly, "they come from chickens." Kim Hyun looked around the silent lecture hall, feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the intense stares of his alien classmates. He set down his coffee mug and tried to smile reassuringly, but this only seemed to make some students lean further away from him. "They're just eggs," he said again, holding up his fork with a small piece of scrambled egg on it. "From chickens. You know birds." The translation devices around the room buzzed and clicked as they worked to convert his words. As the meaning became clear to each species, Hyun watched their reactions change from curiosity to something that looked very much like horror. The flower student beside him, whose name he remembered was Petal Wind, rustled her leaves violently. Her petals, which had been a cheerful yellow when he sat down, turned deep purple, a color he had learned meant distress among her people. "Embryonic consumption," she whispered, her voice shaking to the translator. "You consume the unborn young of other creatures." Hyun nearly choked on his coffee. No, it's not like that. These eggs aren't fertilized. There's no baby chicken inside them. They're just eggs that chickens lay naturally." This explanation did not seem to help. If anything, it made things worse. A student who looked like a walking gemstone, with facets that normally glowed soft blue, now pulsed angry red light. "You harvest the reproductive cells of living beings for sustenance?" the crystal student asked, its voice chiming with disbelief. Yes, I suppose that's technically correct, but it sounds much worse when you put that way," Hyun said, feeling sweat forming on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the room. One of the gaseous beings floating in a transparent containment suit pressed closer to the viewing panel. Through the translator, its voice sounded like wind through caves. "And the dark liquid you consume with such apparent pleasure?" Hyun held up his coffee mug. "This is coffee. It's made from coffee beans, seeds from a plant. We roast them and then pour hot water through them to extract the flavor." "Seeds," repeated a student who resembled a small dragon with iridescent scales. "You grind up the potential offspring of plants and consume their essence in heated liquid?" "Well, when you say it like that," Hyun began, then stopped. He was starting to understand why his classmates looked so disturbed. Professor Velthara, who had been watching this exchange with growing fascination rather than horror, stepped forward. "Human Hyun, perhaps you could explain the other components of your meal?" Hyun looked down at his breakfast tray with new eyes. What had seemed like a normal, comforting meal from home now appeared to be something from an alien's nightmare. He picked up a piece of bacon with his fingers. "This is bacon," he said slowly. "It comes from pigs." The room fell completely silent again. Even the constant background humming of various life support systems seemed to fade away. "Pigs," Professor Velthara repeated carefully. "And what are pigs in relation to your species?" Hyun swallowed hard. They're mammals. Animals. We raise them for food." The reaction was immediate and intense. Petal Wind actually swayed backward, so far that Hyun thought she might fall over. The crystal student's light dimmed to almost nothing. Several of the smaller species made sounds that the translators couldn't process, just emitting static and error messages. A student that looked like a collection of floating spheres connected by energy beams spoke up, its voice trembling with shock. You deliberately breed intelligent life forms for the sole purpose of termination and consumption? Pigs aren't really intelligent like you and me, Hyun protested weakly. I mean, they're smart for animals, but they don't have language or technology or... They have consciousness, interrupted a student whose body seemed to be made of living metal. They experience pain, fear, joy, and you end their lives to consume their flesh. Hyun set down the piece of bacon, no longer hungry. Around the room, he could see his classmates processing this information in their own ways. Some were clearly disgusted. Others seemed terrified, and a few looked at him with something approaching scientific fascination. Do all humans engage in these feeding practices? Asked Petalwind, her voice barely above a whisper. Most of us, yes. Hyun admitted. It's normal for humans. We've been eating meat and eggs and drinking coffee for thousands of years. It's just part of our culture. Culture, repeated Professor Veltera thoughtfully. Her forearms moved in complex patterns as she considered this. So this is not an individual choice, but species-wide behavior? Yes, though some humans choose not to eat meat, Hyun said quickly. We call them vegetarians or vegans, but most of us eat both plants and animals. This information seemed to make things both better and worse for his audience. Better because it meant not all humans were predators, but worse because it confirmed that the majority of his species regularly consumed other living beings. A long moment passed before anyone spoke again. Finally, the dragon-like student raised her head and asked a question that seemed to be on everyone's mind. Human Hyun, if your species consumes other life forms so readily, how do we know that you will not attempt to consume us? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Hyun realized that his simple breakfast had just turned him from an interesting exchange student into something his classmates viewed as a potential threat. The cafeteria that afternoon was a lonely place for Kim Hyun. He sat by himself at a small table near the large windows, picking at a bowl of bland but safe plant-based nutrients that the kitchen staff had prepared for him. Around an enormous dining hall, groups of alien students clustered together at their usual tables, but now there was a noticeable empty space surrounding Hyun's area. Word had spread quickly through the Galactic Institute after his morning revelation. As Hyun ate his tasteless meal, he could hear whispered conversations in dozens of alien languages floating through the air. His translation earpiece picked up fragments of the discussions happening at nearby tables. I heard he consumed the flesh while it was still thermally active, murmured a crystalline being to its companions. My roommate says humans deliberately cultivate other species just to terminate them, added a plant-like student whose leaves rustled with anxiety. The maintenance drones found burned organic compounds in his quarters. Ritual preparation methods, surely, whispered another voice. Hyun pushed his food around his bowl, no longer hungry. He had tried to explain during the morning lecture that humans didn't eat other intelligent species, that they had strict rules about what was acceptable to consume, but his words had only seemed to make his classmates more nervous. A small cleaning robot rolled past his table, keeping a much wider distance than usual. Even the automated systems seemed to be treating him differently now. Through the tall windows, Hyun could see security drones hovering around the campus pathways. They had appeared shortly after lunch, floating silently between the crystal spires and metallic trees. He suspected they were there because of him, though no one had said anything directly. Professor Velthera approached his table, her forearms carrying a tray of the same nutrients she always consumed, a mixture of minerals and energy-rich liquids that glowed softly in clear containers. She sat down across from him without asking permission, which surprised him. You appear distressed, human Hyun, she observed, her musical voice gentle through the translator. I think I've scared everyone, Hyun said quietly, not looking up from his bowl. This morning, I was just a curious exchange student. Now I'm some kind of monster who might eat his classmates. Professor Velthera's large dark eyes studied his face carefully. Do you intend to consume any of your fellow students? The question was asked so seriously that Hyun actually laughed, despite feeling miserable. Of course not. Humans don't eat intelligent beings. We have strict moral codes about that. Then why do they fear you? Hyun thought about this for a moment, watching a group of gaseous students float past their table in their containment suits. They moved in a much wider arc than necessary, clearly avoiding getting too close to him. Because they don't understand, he said finally. To them, I'm a creature that kills and eats other living things. They can't imagine doing that themselves, so they think I must be some kind of predator. Professor Velthra absorbed nutrients from one of her glowing containers, the liquid seeming to flow directly into her translucent skin. Tell me about your world, human Hyun. What made your species develop these feeding habits? So Hyun told her about Earth. He described the ice ages that forced early humans to eat whatever they could find to survive. He explained about droughts and famines, about harsh winters when plants died, and only store meat kept people alive. He talked about how humans had learned to hunt and farm and preserve food because their planet was unpredictable and sometimes cruel. Your world sounds like a place of constant survival challenges, Professor Velthra said thoughtfully. It is, or it was, for most of our history. My species learned to eat almost anything because the alternative was death. The professor was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Around them, the cafeteria was beginning to empty as students finished their meals and left for afternoon classes or study sessions. The other faculty members are concerned, she said eventually. Director HFY Helm has suggested that perhaps the exchange program was implemented too quickly, without proper understanding of human behavioral patterns. Hyun's heart sank. Are you going to send me home? I am not, Professor Velthra said firmly. But I do have a proposal for you. She leaned forward, her forearms folding together in a gesture that Hyun had learned indicated serious consideration among her people. I believe the fear comes from lack of knowledge. My students, and indeed most beings in this galaxy, come from worlds that provided everything they needed. They evolved to consume only what was freely given by their environments. Plants that offered their fruits willingly, minerals that formed naturally, energy that flowed abundantly. And humans evolved on a world that didn't give us anything for free, Hyun said, understanding. Precisely. Your feeding habits are not evil, they are adaptive. But to understand this, the other students need education, not just exposure to your breakfast. Professor Velthra's translator crystal pulsed with gentle light as she continued. I want you to give a formal presentation to the class about human dietary evolution. Explain not just what you eat, but why your species developed these patterns. Show them that humans are not monsters, but survivors. Hyun looked around the nearly empty cafeteria, imagining trying to explain human history to an audience that already feared him. Do you think they'll listen? I think, Professor Velthra said with what might have been a smile, that education is the only path from fear to understanding. The lecture hall was more crowded than Kim Hyun had ever seen it. Students from every department at the Galactic Institute had somehow found seats, squeezing into spaces that weren't meant to hold so many beings. Word the human consumption presentation had spread across the entire campus, drawing curious minds from across dozens of species. Hyun stood at the front of the enormous room, feeling small despite the advanced holographic projection system at his disposal. Security drones floated near the ceiling, their sensors focused on him with uncomfortable intensity. Professor Velthra gave him an encouraging nod from her seat in the front row. Thank you all for coming, Hyun began, his voice amplified to the translation network. I know many of you have questions about human dietary habits. I hope to help you understand that what seems frightening to you is actually a story of survival. He activated the holographic display, and suddenly the air above him filled with an image of Earth as it appeared from space. Blue oceans, white clouds, and brown and green continents spinning slowly in the darkness. This is my world, Hyun said simply. It looks peaceful from here, but Earth is actually a very dangerous place to live. The image changed to show massive glaciers covering continents. Every 100,000 years or so, our planet enters ice ages. The temperature drops so much that most plant life dies. Early humans had to eat whatever they could find, or they would become extinct. A murmur ran through the audience. The plant-like students rustled their leaves nervously as they watched the holographic ice consume vast forests. Hyun changed the image again, showing volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and massive storms. My planet is also geologically active. Volcanoes destroy entire regions. Earthquakes split the ground open. Hurricanes flatten forests. When disasters like these happen, humans couldn't wait for plants to grow back. They had to eat stored food or animals or they died. He could see his audience leaning forward now, their fear beginning to mix with curiosity. A crystalline student near the back chimed softly in what Hyun recognized as a question tone. Yes, we did learn to store meat. Hyun answered the unspoken question. We learned to preserve it by smoking, salting, and drying it. This meant we could survive when fresh food wasn't available. The holographic display now showed early humans working together, hunting large animals and sharing the meat with their families. Humans are social creatures. When we obtained food, we shared it with others in our group. This cooperation helped our species survive when individual humans couldn't. Petal Wind, the flower student who had been so horrified by his breakfast, raised one of her leaf arms. Human Hyun, did your ancestors consume these creatures while they still lived? No, Hyun said firmly. Humans developed methods to kill animals quickly and with as little pain as possible. We understood that the creatures we hunted for food had feelings and could suffer. We tried to minimize that suffering. This seemed to reassure some of the students. The gaseous beings in their containment suits pulsed with softer colors, and several of the smaller species stopped making nervous, chittering sounds. Hyun changed the display to show modern Earth, with its cities and farms and green spaces. As humans developed technology, we learned to grow plants more efficiently. Many humans now choose to eat only plants, or to eat meat very rarely. But the ability to eat many different things is still important to us. A dragon-like student near the middle of the hall spoke up. But surely your species no longer faces these survival challenges. Why continue consuming other life forms? Hyun smiled, having expected this question, because it allowed us to explore places where other species couldn't go. When humans first traveled to space, we could survive on simple rations made from many different ingredients. We could live on space stations, explore harsh planets, and travel between stars because we could adapt our diet to whatever was available. The room was completely quiet now, all attention focused on his words. Most species in this galaxy evolved on worlds that provided everything they needed, Hyun continued. You can photosynthesize like plants, or absorb energy directly from stars, or consume willing bacterial cultures. These are beautiful, peaceful ways to obtain nutrition. But they also mean you must stay close to the specific conditions your bodies require. He gestured toward the diverse audience. Humans eat meat and plants and processed foods because our ancestors had to. This adaptation allowed us to survive on Earth, and later to explore the galaxy. What looks like violence to you was actually the development of flexibility. Professor Velteraz stood up, her forearms moving in patterns of approval. Human Hyun, would you be willing to share some examples of human food preparation with the class? Perhaps items that would not disturb our plant-based and energy-consuming students. Hyun had prepared for this moment. From his bag, he pulled out containers of bread, fruits, nuts, and vegetables prepared in various human ways. The bread was soft and fragrant, made from grain grown on Earth. The fruits were sweet and colorful. The vegetables had been seasoned with herbs and spices in combinations that created entirely new flavors. As he passed these samples around the room, something magical happened. The crystal students' lights brightened with pleasure as they experienced the complex flavors of seasoned food. The plant students were amazed by bread, which transformed simple grain into something completely different. Even the gaseous beings seemed interested in the chemical compounds released by the spiced vegetables. By the end of the session, Hyun was surrounded by students asking questions not about his predatory nature, but about human cooking techniques, food preservation methods, and the cultural significance of shared meals. Walking back to his dormitory under the light of twin moons, Hyun realized that fear had transformed into fascination. Tomorrow, he would eat breakfast with friends who understood that survival came in many forms.